More TV, Vicar. I refer, of course, to the BBC's flagship, though looking more and more like a broken-down puffer, Newsnight. Newsnight. Kirsty Wark is being played by a member of the public this evening. So's Emily Maitlis. Of what do I speak? Well, I come amongst you as the newly ordained Monsignor George Galloway from the parish of Nowhere, from the Archdiocese of Brigadoon. It's as easy as that. You get on Newsnight. As a pastor, having purchased your pastorhood on the internet, even though you're actually an actor, even though you're actually regularly appearing in very minor roles on the BBC, as an actor, you're able to get one of just 6 places in a panel on Newsnight to enunciate, pronunciate your support for Theresa May's Brexit deal. And no one will even mention that the dog collar you're wearing you purchased in a magic shop in Holborn. No one will even refer to the fact that you can sometimes be seen as an extra on EastEnders. You'll be introduced as not just a member of the public, but an ordained member of the public. And you will leave the nation open-mouthed at the things you say whilst professing the Christian faith. I refer to Pastor Lynne Hayter. How well named she is once people got to work on her Twitter feed. Here's just one of them. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but 100% of all terrorists are Muslims. She hasn't been paying attention, of course. She never heard of Anders Breivik, the man who massacred scores of children in Norway, to which I fly early tomorrow morning. I'm speaking there. That's why Breivik is in my mind at the moment. She's never heard of all these white supremacists shooting up black churches and Jewish synagogues and other places of worship. She's never heard of McVeigh in Oklahoma. She's never heard of the Las Vegas shooter who fired thousands of bullets and wounded and killed hundreds of people just last year. 100% of all terrorists, according to this pastor, are Muslim. So, Hayter by name, Hayter by nature. I'm fizzing mad, though, not at her, but at what has become of Newsnight. One long, sorry chapter after chapter of falsification. The same people that brought down The Guardian have brought down Newsnight. The editor, Ian Katz, who brought down The Guardian to the sewer where it currently resides, has brought down Newsnight too. To use a Christmassy metaphor, Newsnight's goose is cooked. It's not just that hardly anybody anymore watches it. It's not just that nobody in their right mind would think of travelling halfway across London to appear on it at 10:35 at night. It's not just that Jeremy Paxman has been replaced by people who couldn't lace his hush puppies. It's that this is what passes for flagship current affairs news nights on the BBC, which we are all compelled, on pain of imprisonment, yes, imprisonment, to pay for. Now, let me make this clear. Neither I nor talkRADIO are or could encourage you not to pay your licence fee, because that would be an offence. It would be to commission, to encourage a criminal offence. And whether or not I pay my licence fee is a matter between me and my confessor. And my confessor's in rather better standing with the Lord than Pastor Hayter and her Seeds of Wealth church that she founded herself on Facebook. But I've got to say this. if the BBC don't act now and close Newsnight down and replace it with a flagship worthy of the name and trade's description, then they are committing suicide. National suicide. On TV, but not on Newsnight. So we're taking calls and jokes and songs on Newsnight. I've seen some fantastic ones. The Vicar of Duplicity. The Vicar of Dimbleby. Maybe the pastor will be the new presenter of BBC Question Time, which frankly isn't any better than Newsnight. Though I declare an interest, as I'm now bound to do, I'm working on an alternative to BBC Question Time. More details soon. I'm flying to Norway, as I said, tomorrow, but I'm appearing at Dublin Castle. No, not that Dublin Castle. The Dublin Castle, the famous rock and roll pub, on Wednesday at the Rock and Roll Book Club. So if you want to come along and see me, do. And I'm in Nottingham at the Savoy Cinema next Saturday. Here, of course, on Friday night on the mother of all talk shows. I'll be talking in a minute to one of my collaborators in my film on the strange death of David Kelly, the author of a book by that name, Norman Baker, former Lib Dem MP, musician, singer, songwriter, and author. But tonight we're going to be going at it hammer and tongs because we're talking Brexit. And he's a I was going to say fanatic, but that might be unkind. A Europhile, whilst I am a Brexiteer. So stand by for fireworks on that. We'll be talking about the summit in Buenos Aires, now, right at this minute, under siege by hundreds of thousands of demonstrators. But they're not necessarily just demonstrating against the parade of the powerful and the rich in their capital city. For a start, there's Prince Mohamed bin Salman, who seems to have been entirely rehabilitated, even though it is now accepted wisdom, Ofcom please note, accepted wisdom, that a premeditated murder, dismemberment and dissolution in acid of a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi, took place in the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, and that phone calls were made and recorded from the room where the dismemberment was taking place directly to the Crown Prince's office. And the CIA has said that the murder was commissioned by MBS, although Congress will not get to hear that because Trump has forbidden it. I just seen the pictures. Trump shaking hands warmly with the chainsaw man. I've just seen Vladimir Putin shaking hands warmly with the chainsaw man. I've just seen Theresa May saying she's going to deal with MBS robustly. As robustly as when she took the tiny dino hand of Donald J. Trump in the Rose Garden, no doubt. Donald J. Trump is in deep, deep trouble. His own lawyer has pled guilty to misleading the law and will be sentenced shortly, and his sentence will be in direct proportion, inverse, to the goods that he has delivered on his erstwhile client. And the newspapers and magazines in the United States and the airwaves are filled with the possibility that Donald Trump Jr. might be headed for the pokey. Surely Donald Trump Sr. would have to pardon his own son, and the pardoning of his own son could trigger the beginning of impeachment proceedings. We'll be talking to Michael Graham, the American broadcaster and columnist at the Boston Herald and political editor of the New Hampshire Journal, Michael Graham, on Trump later. We'll also be talking with Piers Corbyn. Once upon a time, and I've known them so long, I remember it. Piers Corbyn was the better known of the two Corbyn brothers. In fact, Jeremy used to be described as Piers' brother. But Piers has not been eclipsed because he is the last man standing, holding the torch against global warming. He's the last man standing who doesn't believe in man-made global warming. And I give you this warning, Jeremy doesn't share his views. But Jeremy Corbyn, according to Sky News, look it up on their website, our sister station, Sky News website, headline, Jeremy Corbyn could be Prime Minister by Christmas. Ho, 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 as Santa Claus might say. Ho, 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 who'd have thunk it? Now, John McDonnell was on this station earlier. We hope to get Jeremy Corbyn himself in this chair. I hope to interview him for an hour, as my colleague Matthew Wright interviewed John McDonnell earlier today, and it was a very interesting interview. John McDonnell did very well. Matthew Wright did very well. John McDonnell, in the clip you may have heard on the news, said that every Labour MP is going to vote down Theresa May's Brexit deal. But that's not so, because in this evening's papers, one Ian Austin has declared he's voting for Theresa May, and he's appealing to his fellow Blairites to do the same. So it may turn out that John McDonnell was talking too optimistically in his interview on Talk Radio today. We'll see. But Jeremy Corbyn could be Prime Minister by Christmas. Wouldn't that be something to wake up to in your Christmas stocking? What do you think of the BBC? Have I been too harsh? The BBC was started as a propaganda station during the First World War. Did you know that? It's always been a propaganda station. But it's supposed to be a propaganda station for the state, not for a party, still less for a person in a party. I'm hopping mad about Pastor Hayter. Not her particularly. I enjoyed her role in Star Wars, The Force Awakens. It was only a small role, but I enjoyed it. But I'm furious about Newsnight and about BBC Current Affairs and politics and news output. Tell me, is the BBC worth the money? 0344 499 1000. Now, my first guest is an eminent Member of Parliament when he was there, and a very capable Minister of State at the Home Office. Tamer's telling me the BBC isn't a propaganda station anymore. Ho, ho, ho. That's his view. I'm entitled to mine. Apparently that's the official line. The official line is that the BBC isn't a propaganda station anymore. It's a publicly owned broadcasting service. Any more? Have I had to put any more caveats in this, Tamer? Tamer will be in a minute to make sure everything's fine. Oh dear. Now, Norman Baker was a top man, top MP, top minister, top author of The Strange Death of David Kelly, and he and I agree on many things, but we powerfully disagree on the EU. Let's take a listen to what John McDonnell said, and then we'll get Norman to respond and to survey the scene as we come up to Christmas in Westminster. Here's John McDonnell with Matthew Wright.
The longer this government hangs on, the more human suffering there will be, but also, even over Brexit, the more damage they'll do. Because she knows is even if she wins the first vote, she then has to bring in the legislation, and then what will happen? Her own side will pick it. It'll be like John Major all over again.
Well, there you go. That was John's view. Let's hear what Norman's is. Norman Baker, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. And one more thing we agree on, by the way, is that George Harrison was the best Beatle.
Oh, that's terrific.
So,
I knew you were a great Beatles man. Apparently, I've got to get rid of you. We can't have too many agreements. You've been booked here to disagree with me, but that's a good thing.
I'm going to agree with John McDonnell as well, because there is, I'm afraid, a lethargy and a putrid nature to this government, which is going to get worse and worse. And I also agree that, when Theresa May says that we're going to have this to settle everything, it won't settle everything at all. It will go on for years and years and years as we implement this deal, as they probably become unhappy with the consequences, and as we got to take forward the so-called trade arrangements, which don't exist at the moment. So where I disagree, I think, with John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn in particular, is this idea that, well, two ideas they put forward. One is that a general election will solve everything. A general election won't solve anything, because a general election will just make the parties say what they're going to do. It doesn't take us any further forward. It just delays matters. And secondly, the idea that Labour can renegotiate something is dishonest. They won't be able to. There are three options which face Britain now. And the first option is crashing out with no deal, with all the dreadful consequences that has to the economy. The second option is Theresa May's botched deal, which I think is deeply flawed and will cause a major economic problem and lots of other problems as well. And the third option is another people's vote to stay in the EU. And all the evidence from the Bank of England, from the Treasury, from the IMF, from everybody else you want to name, shows that we will be better off in the EU than any Brexit option.
But they said that over and over again, ad nauseum, in the last referendum, and people didn't believe them. Why do you think they'd believe them this time?
Well, they may not believe them, but there's a general view which is shared by all experts that that's the case. And,
yeah, but all experts wanted us to remain, and the people voted leave.
Well, the people voted leave by a very, very narrow margin. And by the way,
well, it was over 1 million votes, Norman. It's not a bad majority.
52 to 48. And of course, Nigel Farage had said at the time, 3 weeks earlier in the Mirror, that if it had been 52-48, he picked those figures actually, the other way around, he would have demanded a re-vote. So, but he seems to have gone quiet on that matter now. It's most countries, when they got a constitutional issue of that important, require either 2/3 or at least 60%. You'll remember, George, from your days in Dundee, that when the Scottish referendum took place in the 70s, I think it was, late 70s, there was a threshold there of 40% of all the population to vote for independence, which wasn't met. That's a sort of normal barrier we have. So it was a very, very narrow vote. And of course, we were told a pack of lies. I mean, we were told lies by both sides, to be honest with you, but we were told a pack of lies by Boris Johnson and his old Etonian friends about how much money there was for the health service, how trade deals could be negotiated within 10 minutes. It just was all rubbish.
Well, of course, you could say that after every poll, Norman. We've won and lost elections together. And we always know that the people that beat us were telling lies. I mean, the people are not stupid. The people are not fools, and no one will prosper in politics by imagining that they are.
Well, I hope you're right, but I mean, I have to remind you that the top Google search the day after the referendum was "What is the EU?", which doesn't suggest everybody knew what they were voting for.
Let's come back to some practicalities. The common wisdom, the prevailing orthodoxy is that the Theresa May deal cannot go through. If John McDonnell is correct, and he's not entirely, because Ian Austin broke ranks not an hour after John McDonnell said all Labour MPs were going to vote Theresa May down. So we must infer that Ian Austin will not be the only Labour MP to vote for Theresa May's deal. We can assume that there will be, perhaps in exchange for a knighthood or two, some peeling off of the hard Brexit wing of the Conservative Party. But it's still overwhelmingly likely, is it not, that the deal will be voted down on the 11th of December?
Yes, I think it's almost certain. It's quite clear that even if you peel off a few Labour MPs, and even if you peel off a few Tories, and by the way, somebody should report Theresa May to the police for an offence under the Peerages Act 1925, because handing out knighthoods for favours in return is, of course, explicitly banned by law, as a consequence of what Lord George was doing.
Yes, Lord George knew my father.
Indeed. Well, there you go. Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that even if you peel off those people at either end, she is, by all accounts, about 100 behind. The SNP seem pretty firm. The Lib Dems, Caroline Lucas for the Greens, the Labour Party by and large, and of course there's lots of remaining Tory MPs, even people like Michael Fallon, who of course has been regarded as a loyalist, to say you're not going to vote for it. So she's got a mountain to climb or a mountain to reduce. I just think she's going to get there.
Now, if she doesn't get there, Michael Barnier said today that there is, and you've repeated it, that there's no going back, there's no renegotiation. It's the deal or no deal or the people's vote. That's what Barnier said today. But
I think that's right.
But some heavyweight correspondents today, was particularly Peston, said actually that's not true at all, and that Mrs. May has in mind a second vote. You like second votes, but she has one in mind, in which she flies to Brussels, gets some pre-arranged further concessions, then comes back for a second vote. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's unlikely that if she did do that. I mean, any pre-arranged concession would be tweaking at the margins. It would be dressing up what's already there in different language. I mean, the EU's got very firm lines, which it won't cross, freedom of movement and so on. It just won't cross those lines. I mean, and why should it? If you apply to a club, these are the rules of the club. You don't join a club where it says you've got to wear a jacket. Then when you get there and say, actually, I'm going to take my jacket off. It doesn't work that way. And as far as second votes are, John, I have to say to you that, as a good trade unionist, no doubt, as you have been or are, the trade unions will there's a strike called and there's a vote for that. The union bosses then negotiate with the management. They then go back to the workers and say, do you want this deal or don't you want this deal? It's quite normal, having had a vote in principle, then to have a vote on the facts afterwards.
Well, I agree with that. Much to my producer's dismay, I have no problem about another vote, though I think there's a very real danger of stirring up a great deal of poisonous rancour in the country by doing so. I do believe that it could be a major shot in the arm for the far right, and I don't even mean UKIP, although to some extent far-right forces are currently coming together a little bit. There are real dangers to democracy in having a second vote, but I actually like referenda. I usually win them, and I'm quite ready to get my armour back on again and go back onto this field. But I just put this to you. The ballot paper didn't say, do you want to remain or leave if the deal is right? The ballot paper said, do you wish to remain or do you wish to leave? It didn't say, do you wish to leave if we can continue to be in the single market, be in the customs union, have this, have that. It didn't. There was nothing conditional about it. It was a clear binary choice, leaving or remaining.
Yes, it was, George. That's quite right. But the commentary that went with it from those who advocated leave was in all cases, that Britain would be better off as a consequence. We would save the money not giving to the EU, we put it into the health service, we'd get our fisheries and agriculture back. There were no downsides put by the Leave campaign. So the ordinary member of the public, who may not be as steeped in all this as the politicians are, concluded, quite fairly probably, that there was going to be a bonus from leaving. And of course we had 50 years of the press, our popular press, slagging off the EU with straight bananas and all the rest of it. So, that was what was told to them. And of course the reality is somewhat different, isn't it?
Well, I mean, as I say, that can be said by the losers of every poll, but we're not going to agree on that. Let me ask you this parliamentary question. If her vote is defeated, where does that leave her? Presumably, surely, in any normal polity, it would leave her tendering her resignation, or at the very least defenestrated, as we saw Mrs. Thatcher defenestrated as the Conservative Party leader. Are we in agreement on that?
Well, I think so, but except that we're not in normal times, and people are behaving. The normal rules of politics, I think, to some extent have been torn up in the last 2 or 3 years. So, I mean, it's unpredictable. I think what she wants to do, as Mrs. Thatcher did actually, is carry on I carry on, I fight to win, whatever Mrs. Thatcher said. I think she may say the same thing. And she may want to hold out for a sort of second vote. I mean, there may be all sorts of... She may be waiting, this is perverse, but she'll be waiting for the pound to collapse, for business to have all sorts of ructions and to try and frighten their troops into accepting this a second vote. That may be her strategy. We'll have to wait and see, but I certainly think she can't survive. I don't think she'd win that, by the way, and I think she'd have to go after the second vote, but she may try and hang on for that.
Here's 3 SMSs that relate to our talk, Norman. Peter in Glasgow says, please remind the honourable gentleman that this country is not a club. And Madge says, good evening, George. Jeremy Corbyn might not be the Prime Minister by Christmas, but he said months ago that Theresa May would not be PM at Christmas. Well, we've essentially agreed with that. And John says the function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. I think myself that Mark Carney over-egged the pudding, and not for the first time, in his comments this week. Surely as a Remainer, even you can see that. I had my own mother on the phone saying that her and my aunt, both of them in their 80s, were worried sick after Mark Carney's remarks that they wouldn't be able to get their medication.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Department of Health is stockpiling medicines as if we're in the middle of World War II, and they're stockpiling food as well. I mean, I know that they're stockpiling petrol and everything else at the same time. I mean, it's a peculiar situation we're in. I don't know whether Mark Carney overacted or not, but what I do know is this. Mark Carney is not a politician. He is employed by the state to deliver a particular function. And I don't think it's very appropriate, really, for those on either side, but particularly the Leave side, to slag off people who are neutral in their jobs. We've seen the same with civil servants. I mean, the civil service, by and large, is something which I think is a good institution. They don't have an agenda. And yet, when they say something people disagree with, they're accused of being political. Who does that? Donald Trump does that. You know, our judges apparently are Obama judges. Civil servants who say the wrong thing apparently are Remainers. You know, we have to actually respect people in their independent roles.
Well, Norman, I'll see you if not on the battlefield, on the film set for Killing Kelly. Thanks very much for joining me. That was Norman Baker, former Lib Dem MP, a musician, singer, songwriter, and author of The Strange Death of David Kelly. What about Newsnight? Who do you want to see on Newsnight? The Reverend Mr. Blobby has been suggested. Mr. Bean, the Reverend Bean, has been suggested. Does the Reverend Pastor Hayter, does she do weddings and funerals? And does she appear as a Newsnight presenter? Who would you like to see on Newsnight? Let me know by text on 87222 or by email through the website at talkradio.co.uk or free through the Twitter at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Arthur Kenny says, yet when Labour was in power, the Beeb was attacked for being left-wing. Oh my goodness. I'm not sure who could possibly have done that, Arthur. Georgie says, I forgot to say hello and happy St Andrew's Day, and I'm enjoying the mother of all talk shows already, especially as I'm already a George Harrison fan. And Peter in Tottenham says, hi George, the best way to start the weekend listening to the mother of all talk shows, but Labour in power by Christmas, what year would that be then? Well, it wasn't me that said it, Peter. It was Sky News. Christina says, I was disappointed to see Macron and others shaking MBS's hand. Not many leaders in the world have a sense of morality. They seem to have no conscience and put money, self-interest and power before right and wrong. Name some leaders George has respect for, please. Well, it's not just, look, you have to shake someone's hand if you're at the same meeting with them, but you can shake their hand and shake their hand. You don't have to behave as if you're partying with them. I saw Erdogan walk past him with an icy stare, not unnaturally, as the foul murder of Khashoggi took place in Istanbul, and I saw that MBS had the grace to close his eyes as Erdogan went past him. What leaders I have respect for? I'll need to think about that one, Christina. And Jason says, typical Remainer arrogance from Norman Baker. Did he say the voters were lied to when they elected one Tory government after another? Did he demand a second ballot when May lost her majority? What a hypocrite. Well, I wouldn't call him that because that's unparliamentary language. Jimmy says, great show as always. A song for the vicar actor on Question Time could be Jesus, He Knows Me by Genesis, as it has a pop at TV Evangelists. See the live version on YouTube. Let's hear from Patrick in Bournemouth. Patrick, welcome.
Oh, hello, George.
Hi.
The second ballot, the second referendum. There was a lady on the radio the other day. She was the member of the European Parliament for Gibraltar.
Oh, yes.
And she was saying the Spanish better keep their hands off Gibraltar because the Gibraltar people voted 99% or something like to stay British, you know. And that's what counts. And the same goes for Northern Ireland. They voted to stay. So they're...
When did they vote to stay in Britain?
And then she went on to say, but we want a second referendum.
Yeah.
So if you're a British colonial somewhere out in the sticks, your vote is sacrosanct. But if you're British and living in Britain, it doesn't count at all.
Well, look, we've been here before, Patrick. One country after another has been forced to keep on voting until they got it right. The Irish had to do it. The French had to do it. And now it seems there are people who are determined that we must do it. But only on this occasion. We're not allowed. For example, I didn't want to be unkind to my collaborator, Norman Baker, not least because he was good enough to come on the show. But I could have said to him, what about all the people that voted Liberal Democrat in 2010 on the basis that you were going to oppose any increase in student tuition fees?
Yeah.
And yet when you got in exchange for ministerial Montegos, note to younger listeners, that was a second-rate motor vehicle that junior ministers drove around in exchange for a fleet of ministerial Montegos, you voted to triple tuition fees. Should we have had a second general election, therefore, on the basis that we'd been lied to?
That's crazy.
I could have made that point to Norman, but I didn't want to be impolite. Patrick, thanks for the call, my friend, as always. Spencer in South Wales up next. Go ahead, Spencer.
Hi, George. How you doing?
Good, sir.
Big fan of yours, George.
Thank you, mate. I'm speaking in Neath in January. Try and get along.
Yeah, we'll do. I'm not that far away.
Okay.
George, my issue really is since the end of the referendum then, you say you're a leaver. I'm a leaver. I wrote to Jeremy Corbyn numerous times on the build-up to the referendum. I also wrote to Madeleine Moon. She was plainly a Remainer.
Who's she? Is she the local MP?
Yeah, Madeleine Moon.
No, I don't know her, sorry.
Madeleine Moon, no, she votes for every war going.
Okay.
Anyway, as far as Jeremy Corbyn, he rebuffed everything I asked for, really. He voted Remain. You always slightly defend him on his stance. Your stance seems slightly unstable with Brexit. To me,
my stance.
I'm a Labour person, but I voted Tory in the last election, okay? Because I thought Brexit was that important.
That must have been lonely in South Wales.
Pardon?
That must have been lonely in South Wales.
Well, you're right, exactly. But we have had Peter Abbott Miles in the past, you know. Sure you can remember him.
Yeah. And some of the Labour people in South Wales are not much different. My
point is, George,
I really don't get your point, to be honest. So put it sharper.
Okay. My point, George, is you've got to be harder on Labour. They're really talking like they're Remaining. And you sound like you're on your way to talking Remaining as well.
Me? You couldn't get more of a leaver than me. I'd leave in a minute with no deal.
I know.
I'd create a war economy if I could. I'd create a
George,
socialist
I'm old as
command
well. I listen to
economy if
every
I
week.
could.
George, but if you're not pulling them up on it, you've got to pull Labour. Right, last week, Doogie phoned you, right? Doogie's a bit of an idiot. But what he actually said last week, he talked a little bit of sense.
But Labour's not in power, Spencer. That's the point. Jeremy Corbyn can't affect the outcome of the Tory government's negotiation.
I get that, George. But if Labour put more pressure on Leave to the Tories, they wouldn't be allowed to do what they're doing.
But you are a politically astute and educated man. Jeremy Corbyn is one of about 20 people in the Parliamentary Labour Party that understands this situation from a left-wing point of view, a Bennite point of view. 95% of his MPs are in favour of remaining in the EU. He's done remarkably well to keep 95% of them on side so far in voting Theresa May's Brexit deal down. That's why I give him whatever support I give him, because it's remarkable that he's not got hundreds of Labour MPs voting for Theresa May's Brexit in name only. Don't you think?
I do, George, but he is in that position of power.
He's not. He's in office. He's in office. He's not in power.
Listen to me now. He has somehow become the Labour Party leader. He has to lead. You're saying that 95% of his MPs, he's going to follow them.
No,
that's what you're saying to me.
No,
he's going to bend down to them.
It's a good point, a good soundbite, but it's not accurate. I'm not saying he has to follow them. I'm saying he has to box clever.
George.
He has to box clever in leading them, and he's boxed exceedingly
George, before the
clever.
referendum, right? I sent an email saying you've been a lifelong leaver. You know how bad the EU has been for our wages and our lifestyle.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
especially here in Wales.
Yeah.
And he wholeheartedly disagreed with me.
Well, I'm not sure who wrote it. I'm not sure who wrote it. I suspect it won't have been him, Spence. But
No, it was his. No, it wasn't signed by him. It was signed by staff.
Yeah,
Jeremy Corbyn's staff.
Yeah,
fair enough. I understand that.
They're reflecting the outcome, a negotiated outcome of a very difficult situation that Corbyn is in there. He's in office in the Parliamentary Labour Party, but he's not
George,
in
if he
power.
doesn't carry on going through, he will lose.
Well,
that's
a legitimate point of view. If we get this interview with him, I'll put it to him, Spencer. Thanks very much indeed for a very interesting call. Let me, in the minute or two I have left, read some more of the written material. Alec Moss says, Mr. Harrison was a very talented and very special man, but he was part of a group that included John Lennon. That man was so talented, he was assassinated. Make a film about that, maybe? No, I've already got my next film in mind, Alec. Peter says, the last credible show on the BBC was Ballamore. What's the story in Ballamore? I still watch it with my children today. Peter in Glasgow. Joe in Prestatyn says, I'm looking forward to seeing Father Dougal Maguire on Newsnight in the near future. Very good, Joe. And Ali in Southwark says, for those who claim a general election and a Labour government thereafter will make no difference, have never lived under Tory austerity and cuts. Brexit or no Brexit, a Labour government under Corbyn would be a revolution for the working class who have suffered under neoliberalism for too long now. Now, one more. Graham in Amesbury says, if Mark Carney is so independent, why, in addition to his worst-case scenario, did he not give a best-case scenario? Absolutely right. As Adam Gary's just pointed out on the Twitter, that economy is actually lots of little economies. Most parts of our economy will have a neutral impact of a no-deal Brexit. Some will benefit and some will suffer. Now, debate is raging on social media, and I hope in time with callers also on the big issues that we are debating here this next couple of hours. One of them, of course, will be climate change. It seems to me that a capitalist system that by definition and indeed by law in its fiduciary duties to its shareholders to maximize profits cannot be a proper steward of the environment and the world that we live in. I always give the example that came from that great well-known Bolshevik, Roy Hattersley, who had spent 3.5 hours on the M1 coming from Birmingham to London, and only when he reached the outskirts of London did he discover why the motorway had effectively been changed to one lane. It was because somebody decided that it was in their own personal, private interest to drive a broad but small boat down the motorway rather than by some other means. Now, you cannot blame the owner of the boat, because the owner of the boat was acting in their own individual interest. But somebody has to speak for, act for, the majority who were trapped behind the broad boat on the M1. That was Hattersley's point. To me, you may think it obscure. It's a pretty good metaphor for the state we're in. We are ruled by people who run the economy in their own selfish interests. I don't use the word selfish pejoratively. I use it literally. Selfish in the interests of self. And therefore, government, hopefully in conjunction with other governments, have to take a role in protecting the environment, the world that we live in, and that we have a duty, moral duty, to hand on to our children and their children and their children in a state that can continue to be lived in and enjoyed. Now, the high science of climate is above my education grade. We're going to hear from two voices, diametrically opposed on this subject, at least, in this second hour. One is Piers Corbyn, who is a meteorologist and therefore worthy of listening to, even if his name wasn't Corbyn. But given that he'll be the brother of the man that Sky News thinks might be the Prime Minister by Christmas, that's quite an important place to be, even if in our system brothers don't have any official role. They surely have some kind of access and therefore influence. And Asad Rehman, climate justice activist, director of War on Want, will be coming on in the second half. And even Tamer is going to join in because, you know, no show without punch. Now, we're not just talking about climate change. We're talking about Brexit. We're talking about Donald Trump. We're talking about MBS. And we're talking about Newsnight and the BBC. And Frank in Dumbarton has a point of view on that very subject. That's why he's up now. Frank, welcome.
Hi, George.
Hi, sir.
I've just got a couple of things to say. One of them was, you were thinking about names for that fake kind of priest lady.
Yeah.
What about the Vicar of Fibley?
Very good. Very good.
My second point was this, George. You're talking about BBC plants. It was not so long ago on the Victoria Derbyshire show. She had two people on, and one she said below their names, one was a lawyer and one was a property developer. And they were just two Jewish people were thinking about leaving the country because of Corbyn's views and stuff like that. It turned out the two were members of some far-right kind of Israeli organisation.
Well, yeah, I mean, that doesn't make them plants, of course, but there have been a lot of cases in Question Time, for example, where people have pretended to be John Doe, a member of the public, but turned out to be Conservative Party councillors, or even farther to the right than that. Yeah, I just said that. It doesn't mean that they're plants. We can't confirm that they're plants, and Frank's been dumped. What can I say? 0344 499 1000. Albert Trigg says, hilarious. Norman thinks Carney and the Bank of England are independent from the government. The Bank of England's predictions are pure propaganda. They omit data from any future government policy implications and are not worth the paper they are written on. Nick Kader says in 1993 the Danes were made to vote again in an EU referendum, and in the counter-protest, police shot 11 people. In Denmark, really? Not implementing Brexit will unleash demons, in my opinion. And Spencer, great call. GG will never backtrack on his EU stance. Never. I never will, Nick. Thanks for supporting me on that. Chris says, TV debate special. Participants wear lie detector. Unknown to them, every lie told, a nose graphic appears next to their name. Like Pinocchio, reveal them at the end. Very good line. Lizzie says, pointless listening to the show when Tamer is on duty. Very disappointing callers. They're subverting the last free space on Talk Radio. I think it's quite a good show tonight. I hope you agree. Jem says, I'm ready for a second referendum too. Bring it on. It must include and only include no deal or May's deal. The first result must be respected. Hear. And Adam Gary, I told you earlier about it. Here's it in full. The truth is that sweeping statements like Carney's are not accurate. Brexit will be terrible for some sectors, virtually neutral for many sectors, and a boost to some other sectors. The economy is really many micro-economies. That's from Adam Gary, my fellow history boy. We do a show together called The History Boys. I must declare that interest. Christina says, the three options of accept Theresa May's deal or leave without a deal or have a second vote on EU membership are not options I would accept, because with all of these options, we are still stuck with a Tory government causing chaos and suffering in the UK. And Chrissy says, I spoilt my EU referendum with the word liars. Now I'd vote Remain because I listen to many phone-in programmes. Leavers shouting and abusive angers me. Blimey, Chrissy, the FBPE mob are the most abusive people I've ever encountered in my entire puff. Here's Alec in Norwich. Go ahead, Alec.
Good evening. How are you, George?
I'm good. I'm enjoying the show. I hope you are.
Absolutely. Small point, which I won't labour on. George Harrison, Beatles, they were a fantastic band. I was born 1964.
Okay.
And so they arrived about the time that I did.
Yeah, just a year before, I think, with their first hit, yeah.
Absolutely. And they're still with me. Fantastic.
I mean, it is truly amazing. When I was in the Beatles experience in Liverpool recently, it was very moving, first of all, very well done, and a credit to Liverpool, as, of course, the Beatles were themselves. It is amazing when you see from whence they came and how they began in the business, that they conquered the world. And that was before we were in the EU, by the way, Alec. Go on.
Indeed, the Quarrymen is where they first started strumming their guitars and singing their tunes.
Yeah.
And the songs are still there now. I'm educating my boy now. He's nearly 16.
Mm-hmm.
And
the Beatles are 40 years dead, and young people at 16 can still dig them.
Absolutely. Now, Brexit.
Yeah.
I voted leave.
Yeah.
I insulate myself from mainstream media to a certain extent. I didn't believe a bus that drove past with a number on it because I don't believe numbers anyway.
Yeah.
My issue with the European Union is the European Commission, and very few people talk about the European Commission.
Uh-huh.
This is the organisation that writes the laws that the European Parliament gets to vote on.
Well, it gets to rubber stamp them. It doesn't get to change them.
Absolutely. There's no private members' bill in the European Parliament.
No.
No. And this organisation, the European Commission, has a big office block in Brussels, surrounded by other office blocks. Floor after floor after floor are taken up by big corporations. That's my problem with the European Union.
Well, I've been there in the Commission building, and I've got to tell you, it's something like what it must be like in Elysium. I don't know if you saw the movie Elysium. It is the plushest, the richest, the most complacent and comfortable place, I think, on the face of the earth. It is administering billions and billions of euros, which are never audited, can't be audited, and it is a closeted cabal of plutocrats, none of whom were elected, none of whom are known, none of you would know who they were, yet they administer vast treasures, partly of our money and of money from other net contributing countries, and they determine what kind of economy we can have. Now, I mean, there are far too many people on the left don't know this, Alec. You cannot run a deficit of more than 3% in your budget by EU law. That means if you're in a depression, you cannot pump prime in a Keynesian way and run a deficit for a year, 2 years, 5 years until your economy is back on its feet. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to hand out services to the state. You cannot say, British Rail's going to run our railways. You've got to have compulsory competitive tendering. Go on.
You don't leave many gaps. It's a bit of an issue. You're very experienced at this. Now, as you say, we've heard about the railways today. We can't take control of our railways if we're a member of the EU. That needs saying. People need to understand that, because most people want our energy companies, our railways, our roads, our NHS. They want those under our control so that we can direct them where they need to be, not where the markets need them to be.
I think that's perfectly put, Alec. Absolutely perfectly put. Thanks very much for the call. Let me go on with the written material. Jem says, I'm ready for a second referendum too. No, I've read that one. Mal in Belfast says, problem I have is that a general election could bring us a Jeremy Corbyn government, and that he said yesterday that he voted Remain in the EU. Well, so did Theresa May. Would that Labour government then get me the Brexit I voted for? Neither will Theresa May. Considering that May wants to remain also, I think the UK would end up with something akin to this deal. In Brexit, we need someone who actually wants to leave the EU, in my negotiating book. Darren Thompson said, I don't understand the point of a TV debate on something that will only be voted on in Parliament. Do you think that Theresa May may be pushing towards another referendum? By the way, rest in peace, Harry Leslie Smith, a true patriot. Indeed, amen to that, Darren. The question of a TV debate completely stumps me. What is the point of Theresa May going round the country giving speeches to hand-picked audience? What is the point of a TV debate? MPs, like judges, cannot be influenced by a TV debate. They can have a debate in Parliament anytime, all the time, and do. So what is the point of this TV debate? What is the point of it being on the BBC, presided over by a fake pastor, maybe? What is the point of it? It's not going to be a debate. It's going to be Jeremy Corbyn against Theresa May and 2 or 3 or 4 of her supporters in the mainstream media. I think it's a mug's game. Now, Piers Corbyn's not just in the building, he's in the studio, and he's brought the sun in with him. He's warmed up the studio already. I'm also, as I said earlier, joined by Tamer. I don't know, are we going to have Asad on the phone at the same time?
No.
Or afterwards?
We'll get him on afterwards.
Now, Piers.
Yes.
The proximate cause of this conversation is the Extinction Rebellion movement, which has been protesting, civil disobedience, arrests, and so on. And they seemed like, to me, fine people. They seemed like the kind of people you and I would normally demonstrate alongside on many things. And then I saw that you were highly critical of them. So we thought we'd give you this slot to explain why. Please.
Yes. Well, me and some other scientists have issued a leaflet called Scientists for Truth Against Extinction Rebellion. And although, of course, many of the individuals there are well-meaning, absolutely, it is a fake protest organisation, which is organised largely through citizens online, the board of which includes a former director of ExxonMobil and Lord Anthony Tudor St John, who's heavily involved, apart from being a banker, in promoting 5G. So you see, it's not what it looks like it is. And I know for a fact that Extinction Rebellion turned up to some anti-fracking operations, which I agree with, by the way. And then...
You agree with fracking or
no,
anti-fracking?
I agree with anti-fracking because of the damage to the water table. But they went along to these, a number of these places, or certainly at least one, and took people away to go and do this line on the road in London. But you see, to me, that is really a bad use of people, if you like, because they'd be much better actually stopping those lorries promoting fracking. Instead, they're lying in roads making false claims about climate, which, of course,
Tell me,
misleads people.
Summarise their false claims then.
Well, they claim that we're going to have something approaching extinction in 12 years' time, whereas actually in 12 years' time we'll be in an extremely cold period due to low solar activity. They are promoted by people like ExxonMobil because it enables ExxonMobil to hold up oil
Well,
price.
when you say promoted, I mean, they weren't being paid to lie down in the street.
I don't know. I think those sort of things
Piers.
ought to be looked into. No. As to the, I'm not saying that. No, but the origins of how they're funded is worthy of looking at. But of course, everybody gets funds from something or other. I suppose mostly by street collections. The point about promoting the man-made climate change theory is incorrect, and it's pointing the world in the wrong direction, and it justifies increasing in energy prices, which leads to fuel poverty. And the World Health Organization points out that about 6 million people a year, or certainly millions around the world, die directly or indirectly through fuel poverty, much of which is caused by the high price of energy, which follows from the climate change story, which is a complete falsity. The science shows that carbon dioxide levels are controlled by the climate. It's not climate being controlled by CO2.
It's not a two-way street.
No, it's not a two-way street at all.
Now, I said earlier you were the last man standing. Turns out you're not. We had a texter from Manchester, I think, who's with you. But it would be fair to say that the vast majority, not just of scientists, but of your erstwhile comrades, are against you on this.
Well,
why should we believe you rather than them?
Well, because we have evidence on our side and they don't. We've given the United Nations IPCC, Al Gore, and the BBC a deadline to produce evidence, a scientific paper that shows that carbon dioxide levels control climate. Now, we know there's no such a paper in existence, but nevertheless, we're challenging them. And we originally gave them till December the 1st, which is tomorrow, but we're extending that deadline to the end of the latest or the new upcoming climate jamboree, which is happening in Poland. And we'll finish on the 14th of December, so we're giving them until then. And by the way, our own long-range forecast for that event is that there will be masses of snow in the first half of it, which will rather embarrass their global warming claims.
Tamer.
Just a point of clarification, just so that everybody knows, we did ask the Extinction Rebellion. I'm having problems with words today. To come onto the show on several occasions, and they refused point blank. So I want to make that absolutely clear.
Sure.
So that you know and we know that they
no,
have.
We'd
been
like
offered.
to debate them.
We'd love to talk to them about it.
We're going to have a public meeting on the 20th of December anyway.
And those claims about being funded, we could have pushed in, but obviously we have no
on that. I've got nothing to say except I've heard aspersions cast. But okay, let's say I can't say anything. Because I don't know.
Yeah.
But
you did say something. You said that ExxonMobil and
I said that,
a banker were
involved in.
They're on the board.
On the board, yes. That doesn't mean people have been paid, right? It doesn't mean that.
No,
but,
of course.
Information is becoming more and more available on Windows on the world. Internet, TV. And I would make a point about numbers of scientists. Most scientists don't say anything about this. There was a petition signed by 30,000 scientists saying that there's no evidence that man is controlling climate.
How many? Sorry, how many was that?
I believe it was 30,000.
And how many? So, what proportion of that 30,000? So, what overall proportion of the overall scientists is 30,000? Because 30,000 could be
people,
0.5% of the overall scientists. When we've got the IPCC saying that 98% of scientists are suggesting that climate change is a real thing.
They don't say that. That is completely untrue. That claim,
but that's what they're saying.
Yeah, but it's untrue. If you look at the scientific paper,
but it's not just them.
Yes, wait a minute. Well, one, it's nothing to do with opinion. Otherwise,
no, exactly. This is pure fact. These are scientists. It's like saying that gravity doesn't work. I throw an apple up, it's not going to come down.
Look, Galileo was hauled before the scientists of the day, i.e. the Catholic Church, and told he was wrong and outnumbered. Well,
but that's a very different time.
No, it's not at all. Not at all.
Argue
absolutely not
with
at all.
I mean,
the Catholic Church backs man-made climate change, and it has become a religion. The claim that 97% of scientists believe it is completely irrelevant because it's only evidence that counts. They're on the gravy train.
But they're using
Wait
evidence.
a minute. They're on the gravy train, and the actual data in the paper shows that only 0.3% of those listed papers actually stated that they believed that man was controlling the climate. All the rest of them were just doing some sort of research under the heading of climate change, and therefore they were put in a box to be claimed as
Here's a couple of tweets. Does Piers agree with Trump that climate change / warming is not happening? And the second from John Locke. That was from JC, the only option, by the way.
Well, look,
the second one from John Locke.
Okay.
Piers has fallen for the Maunder minimum nonsense, saying it's going to be much colder on the earth in 12 years.
Yes, well, it will be much colder on the earth in 12 years. The extreme cold happening in America right now, Canada and America, especially East America,
there was forest fires
was predicted by us.
Piers, there are bumblebees outside. It's the 30th of November.
So what?
I mean,
so what? All these extremes, relative extremes, are caused by the wild jet stream, which we predicted. And that hot weather in Britain and Western Europe in the summer was also something we predicted, a bit like 1976.
So what's the conspiracy then? Why are they lying?
A bit like 1976. And the Northern Hemisphere as a whole land was actually below normal on the 30th of July because it was very cold in Russia and also parts of America. But the BBC quote you something false. Why do the media make all this up? Because they're desperate.
No, not the media, the scientists.
No.
Why are the scientists
the media
suggesting that it's...
Most of the time you hear something in the media which says scientists say. It's not scientists saying anything.
No, but the IPCC report...
It's the media making it up.
...is scientists, it's not the media.
The IPCC report is not scientists either. The IPCC is a committee of government representatives which meet together to put forward this
Okay,
nonsense.
Well, what about the World Meteorological Organization then? They disagree completely with you. In fact, we asked the IPCC and the WMO and the Met Office to join us on the show, and they said they wouldn't because you are completely and utterly fabricating stories based on, going against 98% of scientists that are saying otherwise. So
it's not 98% of scientists, and that is completely irrelevant. You've got to look at the actual facts, and we're saying... You produce actual observational evidence that carbon dioxide levels increasing is followed by, for example, increasing temperatures. And there is no evidence of that in a million years of data. It works the other way round. It works the other way round. And the reason it works the other way round is that the sea controls it all. And there's 50 times more carbon dioxide in the sea than in the air. So when the sea warms up, a little bit of carbon dioxide will come off.
So the damage caused by the sea?
Just like when you warm up a bottle of pop, carbon dioxide goes off. If you make water colder, it can absorb more.
Okay, so you're suggesting then that the sea hasn't been tampered with, because the sea is probably our biggest problem right now. And if you're suggesting it's all based on the sea, then surely you can't deny that we've affected and impacted the quality of the oceans, and that will impact, therefore, the climate, right?
This is completely irrelevant.
But how is it irrelevant?
It's completely irrelevant
to global
because,
warming.
Yeah,
I don't think Piers is saying,
warming.
are you, that the prevailing economic system we have in the world, which effectively, bar one or two exceptions, is the monopoly capitalism, is damaging the environment. You wouldn't dispute that point, would you?
No, of course. Well, a lot of economic systems damage environment, and capitalism certainly damages environment in terms of smoke pollution.
You're not arguing that the environment is not being degraded.
No, it is being degraded, but quite a lot of it has unfortunately been degraded by green policies, such as we're now burning massive amounts of wood in the Drax power station. That wood comes from destruction of forests in America, and the smoke produced by that wood, because it's relatively low temperature burning, is very similar to diesel pollution, and it's like increasing the number of diesel cars in Britain by 25%. And this is meant to be saving the planet. So a lot of green policies that come from the climate change story are fake green policies, and they're to purely make money. And I suggest people come on our website and, be discerning.
What is your website?
Weatheraction.com, and you can find scientific papers in there which show you which policies are fake green and which are good green. But let us be discerning and not just support those who are actually promoted by ExxonMobil and those people who want, for example, 5G. These globalists who want to make money for Wall Street big corporations.
As I said earlier, Jeremy Corbyn used to be introduced as Piers Corbyn's brother. Now it's the other way around. Have you spoken to Jeremy about these matters, and have you had any luck?
Well, of course, but you see, Jeremy has to follow Labour Party policy, so all I can say is he follows Labour Party policy. But I would say Labour policy includes, obviously, the Climate Change Act of 2008, which says in it that as the science changes, the measures will change. Now, the science has changed because the runaway warming we were promised by the IPCC and so forth has not happened. In fact, we have cooling if you look at the actual data shown from satellites. And we have a wild jet stream. That means the upper air between, in the temperate regions is now moved waving north and south a lot, which is why we sometimes get very cold blasts and sometimes, for relatively shorter times, warm blasts. We have a wild jet stream, which is contrary to what would happen under the warming scenario of the IPCC. You would have a jet stream that has just moved to the north, which hasn't happened. So there is a different scenario going on, therefore the measures have to change. And that opens the door to a proper discussion on the matter.
Here's one from Stu in Wigan. George, please ask your climate expert if he is saying that climate change isn't going to have a catastrophic effect on the world's environment.
Well, it's going to turn a lot colder, which will have some effect. But the things claimed by Extinction Rebellion are complete nonsense. They've gone on about bees dying, for example. Now, bees are dying, but it's not caused by heat or lack of heat. It's caused by various insecticides and so forth.
Yeah.
Now, that has to be dealt with.
Viruses and bugs, yeah.
Yeah. And the forest fires you mentioned are, forest fires have always happened. There's actually less forest fires in California than there was 100 years ago. But those sort of things happen pretty randomly and get brought on by certain extremes. And
but
you can have extremes of weather under the...
Now, look, Tamer, you're speaking.
There is less hurricanes than there used to be. They said there would be more hurricanes, but there's actually been less. They said we'd have the end of snow in Britain and Western Europe. We've had a lot more snow. This has happened from 2000. They made those predictions to be true. They said by 2010. None of the predictions they made in 2000 have come true.
Tamer, you're speaking up for Extinction Rebellion.
No, I'm not speaking up for Extinction Rebellion. I'm speaking for the climate change.
No, I mean technically, because they're not here and we're criticising them, or Piers is. It's only right that
we're criticising the theory,
play devil's advocate. How would you like to respond?
If I were in the and look, I'm going to be perfectly candid here. I believe in climate change. I think there's evidence to suggest for the last 35 years of my life, all I've been hearing is climate change. Well, you give me some evidence. Well, we're working on that. And if you've given the IPCC a deadline, Piers, we will chase that up and we will find out what's going on and we will get to the bottom of it.
14th of December.
Yeah, we'll check it out. But what I would say on to kind of close this matter is that, look, it's a very big indictment when 98% of the world scientists
but that's not 98%.
A false claim. It's false claim nonetheless. It's still a claim
that's. Why are you making it if it's nonsense?
But I'm not. That's what I know. That's what I've been told.
Do you know?
And it's the same way that you've got your 30,000 scientists that are saying otherwise.
The paper that was published that said 97% is actually, when you read it, it isn't correct.
But I could say that about your website. I could say that about any website.
There's another scientific paper analysing that paper.
If I wanted to get an opinion on one thing and another, trust me, I could. I could find websites that would support. That's what echo chambers are all about. But look, my point is that there is a big drive globally. There's been a UN endorsed report by the IPCC. Scientists are not in the game of gain. They're not trying, but they're not trying to capitalise in the same way. Why would scientists lie?
For money. Look, I know people involved, and they say, "Look, Piers, you're probably right, but I've got mouths to feed."
Well, we've got to take a break for some capitalist messages. Thank you both for a spirited exchange on the issue of climate change. Now, we have heard a spirited exchange between Piers Corbyn and our own Tamer Asfahani. Just in the interest of balance to both, we've got a real climate justice activist, Director of War on Want, Asad Rehman, on the line now. Asad, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Now, you heard Piers Corbyn, a highly contentious case. How do you respond to it? Oh dear.
I'm going to bring somebody on who said...
Start at the beginning, because we lost the first bit of that, Asad.
Oh, sorry.
I was asking you how you'd respond.
Well, I mean, Piers' comments are not just simply misguided, they're actually downright dangerous. I mean, it would be laughable if we had somebody on radio talking about flat Earth or the lizards are running the world. Actually, the reality is you don't need to be a climate scientist now. You need to just look around the world. Killer droughts and floods, devastating the lives of millions of people. You know, whether we're talking about the forest fires, not just in California, but the drought in sub-Saharan Africa, temperatures in Pakistan hitting 53.5 degrees centigrade, killer tornadoes and hurricanes. We're at the extremes of weather. And we're seeing, and what we've now heard from climate scientists, and this idea that they're not 98%, I mean, it's just total twaddle. The only people who've been denying the climate reality have been the oil lobbyists. And they have been the ones, the Exxons, who've been funding climate denialism, the Koch brothers, the people who want to put profit before people and planet. And their views are echoed by people like Donald Trump in the United States and Bolsonaro in Brazil. This is the people who want to stick their heads in the sand. Why? Because actually the people who are being most impacted at the moment are people in the global south. Now, we can go through the science. We're in the past 4 years have been the warmest 4 years on record. We've had the 20 of the warmest years ever in the last 22 years. What we're seeing around the world, and just to put it in perspective, this is at a 1 degree average warming. And scientists tell us that once we hit 1.5, we will start to become into tipping points when the impacts of climate change will start to affect our water, will start to affect food, will cause displacement of people. The UN estimates 1 in 30 people will be forced from their homes because of this, because of the climate crisis, compounding existing inequalities. So the reality is now we are actually in decade zero. The decisions we make now will determine not only what kind of world we live in, but the number of people who will be impacted. And the hundreds of thousands of people who are dying already, the millions who are losing their lives and their livelihoods and their homes, from whether it's from Puerto Rico to the Philippines, from Japan to Bangladesh. The reality of climate change is here, and we must act.
Now, he made the quite, on the face of it, illogical claim that an oil company was behind climate extinction. Why would they do that?
I mean, that's just total poppycock. I mean, the reality is that the oil lobbyists have been funding climate denialism, and they've known. If you look at the admission by Exxon, for example, in the 1970s, they knew that burning fossil fuel was causing global warming, was causing an increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which was triggering an increase in temperature and would result in devastating impacts. They knew that. They sat on that. Instead, they pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into oil lobbyists, into fake pseudoscientist platforms to try and deny climate change. They're working from the same copybook as the tobacco industry. When the tobacco industry knew that smoking was causing cancer, it spent millions and millions to keep its business going, and instead started to suggest that the science wasn't proven. The reality is now, there is no debate about that climate change is not happening. The real question is, what are we doing about it? And
well, he actually argues that it's in reverse, that the next 12 years, it's going to be much colder. We're in for a cold snap in a dozen years.
It's called climate change. What we're seeing is the extremes of weather. And I think anybody who's got a head on their shoulders, who looks around the world, can see the changes that have happened in our weather patterns, the extremes that we're seeing, and we are seeing the extremes, the strongest hurricanes ever recorded.
He said there's fewer hurricanes than there was 100 years ago.
Piers is simply just spouting incorrect garbage. I mean, really, like I said, it's not. This is not simply about misguided. It's actually dangerous. It's really dangerous because what it does, it allows those people in power to carry on with business as usual, recognizing that they're sacrificing the lives of people all around the world, and particularly the poorest people who have had the least to do with causing climate change. The reality is we need to act. But actually, the more positive thing I would like to focus on is that actually the solutions to climate change exist. Right? And the solutions are actually going to make the world a much better, more equal, greener, fairer, and a safer place for all of us. We can actually transform our energy systems from fossil fuels to renewable energy. We can tackle energy poverty by having all of our homes retrofitted so that pensioners in this country don't have to make a choice between whether they're eating or heating. We can bring energy to the 1.5 billion people who don't have energy at the moment around the world. We can change the way we produce food so we're not wasting a third of all the food we produce and burying it in the ground while nearly 1 billion people go hungry. That means that fundamentally we have to alter our economic system. That's why the rich elites don't want to take action on climate change, because they know that the only solution to the crisis of climate change is a fundamental change of our economic model. It's about tackling the power of corporations, tackling the power of elites. So really, that's the big conversation we should be having, and we should be asking our politicians, why are they not acting, and whose interests are they acting on behalf of? And they're certainly not acting in the interests of ordinary people, because if they were, they would have been taking the steps to tackle climate change long ago, because they knew what the reality of climate change was from the 1970s.
Powerfully put. Thank you very much indeed. Asad Rehman, who is a climate justice activist and director of War on Want. Russell says, May and Company is more like Dad's Army. Hammond is akin to Private Fraser, insisting we're doomed, ye hear. And May mimics Corporal Jones shouting, Don't panic, I'm in charge and I know what I'm doing. Whilst Dan Hodges of the ARP supports everything JC does and says. So what could possibly go wrong? Now, little Tiny Hands, Tiny Dino Hands, is in Buenos Aires, and I saw them shaking the hands of Dr. Bonesaw, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, earlier. The question is, will he shake the hands of the President of the Russian Federation? That at least is the question, fixating much of the so-called liberal media in the United States. As I've spoken of before, there's a very peculiar coalition, a beast with two backs in the United States. The liberal Clintonites and the deep state and the war industry are in full harness together. And his lawyer has just pled guilty to quite serious crimes. And he will be sentenced, I think, next week, Mr. Cohen. And it may be that his sentence will be the lighter for him having spilled beans on at least key members of Donald Trump's family and inner circle. At least that's what they're saying. They're saying that Donald Trump Jr. is now exposed by the admission of guilt made by Trump's lawyer, Mr. Cohen, and that he too, therefore, might well be indicted. A man who has a point of view on all of these matters and who can be relied on to speak them plainly is my old colleague Michael Graham. Michael, welcome.
So glad to be back with you and to be back on Talk Radio, George. It is a real thrill.
Thank you.
Every time I'm on with you, I get 4 or 5 notes from friends going, I can't believe you were on with George Galloway.
Well, I get the same.
You
but
got to believe in free speech and free exchange of ideas, and that's why we're here.
That's what radio is about. So let's start with Mueller, Cohen, and the danger to Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr. What can you tell us about that, Mike?
Well, that part about the danger to his son is, particularly interesting. Broadly speaking, I hate this entire Russia story. I think it's been just ridiculous from the beginning. The fact that Donald Trump was a corrupt hack big businessman who did deals with shady people is hardly news. That's like people saying after electing Bill Clinton, wait a minute, he likes women? What? So come on, he's asleep. He works in that kind of arena of where politics and power and money and property all meet sleaze. And that's just who Trump is. But if it is the case that there's, evidence that Donald Trump Jr. testified not truthfully.
Falsely, yeah.
Exactly, false, whatever. That's an issue. But I come back to, this is the part that where Trump supporters in America, and I'm not a big Trump guy, but I know a lot of, I'm a lifelong Republican, talk radio. There are a lot of Trump fans in talk radio. What they're going to say about all this story is, what was he lying about? Whether the deal on building a private building in Russia was going on in January of 2016 or June of 2016. Who cares? It's a real estate deal. He was a real estate guy.
A real estate deal that never happened.
Stealing an election. Exactly. What's that got to do with stealing an election? And this is where I think that beast with two backs that you so evocatively described, that I may in fact need a shower after this conversation, has really made a strategic error. They played the collusion card so hot and heavy early on, insisting that absolutely the election had to be stolen because, of course, Hillary couldn't lose it on her own, and that Trump had to be colluding somehow with Russia, and they must have done something illegal to change votes and somehow fix the election. There's still no evidence of that at all. It is all still this Trump was surrounded by sleazy people who did sleazy things, which is not news in America.
Now, one of the purposes, from my point of view, of the whole Russiagate thing is to stop Trump doing what he pledged to do and was in his platform for election, on which he was elected after all, which was to reset relations with Russia. Such is the climate on that front. It's the Eastern Front, and it's very inclement.
Right.
He's even, it would appear, unable to meet with Putin at an international gathering of the G20. So they've already won that particular argument.
And that is, to me, the big picture stuff. We could spend hours, and if you were unfortunate enough to watch CNN, George, you would see hours of this, deconstructing every sentence of every comment that Trump and his people have ever said about what they knew about anything with a Russian accent. And it is all so, navel-gazingly pointless. The real question is, what should the policy of the West be towards Russia, and to piggyback on something you mentioned earlier, and towards Saudi Arabia? Now, you and I are likely to disagree. I think Russia's a heinous force for authoritarianism. I think it just shows you why Europeans are the feckless Euro weenies that I mock them for being for years, because they won't stand with Ukraine in the face of this Russian use of force. The fact that Russia could redraw the map of Europe without serious consequence. And the same in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, whatever the deal is on MBS, and I don't know about you, George, I think people who claim they know what this guy's about, I think we're now finding out that they've been lying all along. They've been projecting that he's a Western-looking, more modern, person, and I don't think we know what this guy really is. But and once again, I think we would disagree. I think having the West and Saudi Arabia and the Sunni nations working together against Iran is a good thing. But whether you think I'm right or wrong, you're right. You have to have these conversations, and getting sidetracked on when did Trump decide he was going to try to give a penthouse that was never built to Putin, blah, blah, blah. What's that got to do with anything? Name a single problem in Ukraine, Crimea, or the Middle East that will be solved with that conversation.
Very interesting. Michael Graham, thanks for joining us and kicking off the final hour, which will be a Trump hour, a Brexit hour, a Reverend Blobby hour. I even heard Mike Graham, the other Mike Graham, describing himself in one of our trailers as the Reverend Mike Graham. Everyone is doing it. I'm a Monsignor myself, Monsignor George Galloway, if you don't mind. Satjinder says, George, can you play the magnificent Within You, Without You from Sgt. Pepper, the greatest album of all time? It's unbelievable to think he was only the third best songwriter in the Beatles. After you listen to this, #RIP. And my old friend Filza Siddiqui from Ireland says, Tiny Hands ignored Mr. Putin the same way I ignore my husband when he doesn't listen to me. Trump needs to grow up. Wonder if his supporters have changed their views about him. What do you say? And X-Ray Vision says there have been rumours of Trump having many sealed indictments at the ready that would ruin Hillary and many deep state players. Is this true? Well, he can't draw up indictments. Only a grand jury can do that. And this from Ali says, regarding the climate change argument, I think Piers does have some elements of truth. But I strongly believe we should encourage people to go green, such as recycling, using renewable energy, being resourceful, being independent, encouraging more organic produce, etc. But from the moment big companies exploit this for profits, we should ditch them. Are these giants really saving the planet, or are they the same old greedy corporations? Tony X, my dear friend and wise man, says we will win any future EU referendum with a massive majority, but the campaign will be the worst thing this country has seen since the Civil War. The people's vote, pussy posse, never think of that. Well, of course, I wouldn't put it that way, Tony, but you're right. Bob Justice says the EU debate is wearisome. Too many socialists are being hoodwinked and have Stockholm syndrome regarding the neoliberal EU, who proffer what are considered social policies. It's smoke and mirrors. There's nothing social about what's happened to society. #Alston Report. Let's hear from David in Chesterfield. Go ahead, David.
Hiya, George.
Hi.
It's actually the Reverend David.
The Reverend David,
the
very Reverend, in fact. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was on the internet last night.
Very good.
The thing with Piers Corbyn, there's a couple of points to make, George. One is that Piers Corbyn makes a living out of predicting the weather.
He doesn't make a great living, I can tell you.
Well,
he's not a man. I disagree with him, but he's not a man that's in it for the money. Trust me.
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is that people buy his predictions. So companies don't put their hand in the pocket to pay people to predict things that they think are inaccurate. Somebody thinks is accurate in some of these predictions. And the other point I'd like to make is, if I walked into my house and it was very, very warm, if I walked in from work and it was very, very warm, I would presume that I'd left the heating on, a heat source on.
Mm-hmm.
Climate models that the scientists have been using use CO2, but a lot of the models, or the vast majority of the models, don't actually have the sun in the model.
Apparently, Tamer tells me because the sun doesn't produce CO2. CO2 is trapped in the atmosphere.
Yeah, did Tamer?
I had no idea Tamer was such a meteorologist and scientist.
No, does Tamer not know that the sun produces heat?
It does produce heat, yes, of course.
It does.
In fact, it produces all heat. It's
exactly.
the source of all heat.
So to not have it in the model, to say that it's the CO2 causing the warming, and it's nothing to do with the sun, is absolutely it would be silly. You wouldn't walk in the house. You wouldn't walk into your house tonight, George, find that it's a very, very hot house, and you wouldn't think to yourself, oh, do you know what? There must be lots of CO2 in this house.
Yeah, fair point. I'm headed for Norway first thing in the morning, where I'm pretty sure it's not very warm. But thanks, David, for that call. Bob Justice says the EU debate is wearisome. Oh, no, I've done that one. Helen Lakin says your caller, Alec, was spot on. A vast majority of Leavers' main voting reason was indeed to rid themselves of the said unelected EU policymakers. Great show. Love it as always. It's filled with jaw-dropping, eye-opening, shockingly brilliant commentary. Helen Lakin, no relation to me, but a very welcome correspondent. Freedom, that's D-U-M-B, says, George, my Twitter feed is full of pictures of Trump, Putin and MBS from the G20 summit. I haven't heard much about who Theresa May has been talking to. Do you know anything about it? Love the show. Theresa who, I think they're all asking. Here's first up, it's the wonderful Georgia in Spalding.
Hello, George. How are you doing?
I'm great. Nice to hear from you.
Well, you too as well. I've really enjoyed the show tonight. But like I put in my tweet, my mind is blown by Piers Corbyn because my spidey senses, as I called them, I'm all for thinking that it's definitely climate change. And yet he comes across as a really nice bloke, eminent in his field. And I used to do science in the past. And, he must be reading peer-reviewed literature, etc. So I sort of don't want to believe him, but I do want to believe him. Do you know what I mean?
I like him as a person very much, and I've known him for decades, many, many decades. He's certainly not saying what he's saying for money. If you knew him, he hardly has more than the clothes on his back. He lives extremely impecuniously, so nobody's funding him. He's not doing it for money. He's saying what he believes to be true. The problem is there's an overwhelming tide of logic and facts which suggest that he's wrong. That's the problem, Georgia.
Yeah, well, it is. And the other thing is, I think Tamer actually said, it might have been someone else, that scientists don't lie.
Well, they do. I mean, that simply isn't true. Tamer said that, but it's simply not true. Scientists lie all the time.
Well, they do.
He's saying he only asked why would they lie. Well, as Piers answered, they lie for money.
Well, yes, they do, because, when I was working for Medical Research Council, we needed to get grants. And I put in another tweet that my boss at the time was verging on genius. He was so clever. And he encouraged me. I was his lab tech. And, I got a second author nature paper out of the work we were doing. But our boss, the big head honcho, the professor, said his projects weren't sexy enough, and because he looked like a typical bird watcher. That sounds really bad, doesn't he? No, he used to have breakfast with his beard and wear tank tops. Not the top boss, my cranky sort of clever.
I haven't seen a tank top in years, Georgia. You really took me back there.
No, but it's funny actually because it's back in the 80s. I'm digressing a bit. I had to order a lab coat for him, and he's about the size I am now. And he said, I'm about a size 14. And I thought, that's the reason his tank top doesn't fit, because he's a little bit bigger than that. But anyway, I digress. But there was another thing I wanted to say. I wanted to say something good about me, because years ago, I did start working for Amersham International, which was a pharma company. I know, boo. And I remember one morning in the tea break at a briefing, they said, we've just discovered this breast cancer drug. And I was thinking, wow, that's fantastic. This is back in the 80s. And they said, yes, think of all the profit we can make. I got out of there as soon as I could. But,
in capitalism, Georgia, everything is reduced to the cash nexus.
Money. And I will say something. I did vote Remain, okay, but I've been educated quite a lot in the last couple of months listening to you guys.
Well, listen to this, Georgia. Listen to this from Jason. #Lexit, #CPB, #Morningstar. Under the terms of May's deal, we remain subject to the Stability and Growth Pact, part of the Maastricht Treaty. Deficit financing is outlawed, as you state. That and the EU's competition laws effectively destroys Labour's manifesto commitments. In a nutshell, Jason, I wish every member of the Labour Party, every supporter of the Labour Party could have that put under their nose. One paragraph. That is exactly my case.
It is. And you know what? I remember, George, a lot of my friends were Lexit, and I couldn't quite get it. And I thought, no. We can't do it. But now I'm thinking, yes. I mean, basically, this country is in ruins anyway. We might as well start from the bottom. We don't really want to be a vassal state, as I keep hearing. We don't really want to be kowtowing to that lot. And
the more I see of the people who run the EU, it's the reverse of the old Groucho Marx, in a way. Any club that would have me as a member, I wouldn't want to join. Any club that would be run by them, I wouldn't want to join.
Well, exactly, and it is. I mean, I was always in two minds about it, but I did campaign with the Labour Party for Remain, etc., and I'm regretting it now. And I'm not just saying that because I like your show and I like a lot of the people on there. It's just, I'm just thinking, well, we need to get away from them. It's whatever happens, this country's ruined anyway. There's so many of us below the breadline, and the UN rapporteur came round, and nobody's interested. I mean,
no, they're not interested. No, not in Parliament and not in the media. We're the only people that have actually given it any proper coverage. Georgia, because of the hour, I must press on. I thank you very much for the call, and you wait hours for a woman caller, and they start coming in at once. It's the legend, Norma, in Bristol. Norma, welcome.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I used to listen to Carl from Plaster. Do you remember Carl?
Do I remember him? I spoke at his funeral. God rest his soul.
I think I must be one of the older regular ones like he was.
Carl from Plasto is forever in my heart.
Yes. No. The thing is, just a couple of things. You were saying about good leaders. Well, tomorrow, Nelson Mandela, if he'd lived, would have been 100.
Okay.
So I thought that was one to mention.
It is. I wish I'd known that.
But, yeah.
If I had researchers, I'd be putting my boot in their backside for not telling me that.
Well, I hope I'm right, but I think I am. Now, on the EU, I mean, we do need decisions. It's just going on and on and on. Now, my view is this. If we could negotiate, first of all, a total reform with the EU, then I would vote that we stay and we work with it. But if not, the answer, I think, must be no deal, because there's a lot of scaremongering, and at least we would be free to make our own rules. And those are decisions, you know.
Well, it's not negotiable because the articles of association cannot be altered. It's not like a tennis club where you could decide that we're going to change these articles. These articles are in the pillars of the building. And I don't have researchers, but my producers, who were stung by what I just said, have pointed out that he's 100 in July. So,
shit.
never mind.
Sorry.
It is Churchill's birthday today, but
I'm
Churchill's a very
sorry.
different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about
Not at all. Lovely to hear from you, Norma. And people worry when we don't hear from you, so make sure you call every week, please. Jem, No Deal Lexit, says Piers Corbyn is right on wood burners being high polluters. And John says man-made actions such as the industrialisation of UK mass farming causing climate chaos. Christina says sometimes private companies who have a vested interest commission research, and the frame of reference they give researchers to follow is designed to affect the outcome of that research. In this respect, some of the research findings are questionable. Well said, Christina. Art Bennett says, be certain of one thing. Global climate modelling is very complex, uncertain, and an unperfected area of science. Uncertainty is the key, but if consequence of being wrong is sufficiently dire, we ignore at our own peril. And he, in parenthesis, says, also see Freeman Dyson. Asif says, if only Jeremy spoke with the animation and not just the passion of Piers. Fantastic debate, brilliant radio, Asif. And Ireland is the first country. This is from Manicmo 2019. Ireland is the first country in the world to divest from fossil fuels. That makes me proud. Climate change is real. We all need to work together and save our beautiful planet and all life upon it. Let's hear from John in Manchester. Go ahead, John.
Hello, George.
Nice to hear from you.
I'm Catholic, so it'll be Father John.
Father John, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, it's regarding the climate change debate with Piers Corbyn there.
Yes.
I did text in earlier. You read it out. As I was saying to your researchers, it's very interesting that the people who advocate for climate change, they're never scientists. You've got activists and environmental lawyers like there was on Sky TV this week. But there's never actually a scientist that comes out and gives us some real facts. What you get is these so-called models or predictions of what's going to happen in the future. None of them ever come true.
Wasn't the IPCC thoroughly stuffed with scientists?
Well, were they? Do we really know that?
I think so. I mean, there were a collection of governments, but those governments had armies of scientists with them and working with them in the preparations.
That's right, but they would all have been appointed and therefore handpicked.
Yes, well, I mean, that's true, but, you know, the old saying, 40,000 Frenchmen can't be wrong. In fact, it's much more than 40,000.
Well, you might say that, but as Piers Corbyn does point out, consensus is actually irrelevant when it comes to science. The only thing that's relevant in science is facts. And they have never given us any real facts. Now, I remember back in the 70s when we were all worried about an ice age. And I was very young then, and I actually remember this. I think I remember when climate change, the whole debate started. There was a Swedish scientist, I believe, who came out and he said that perhaps the amount of CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere might negate the ice age that's definitely going to happen. And I think that was the very birth of this whole climate change debate.
OK, John, many thanks. Philip Dunn agrees with you, I think. He says man-made global warming is the greatest scientific fraud in history. Go Piers. And David Leviscott says, how about changing our immediate climate and putting an end to homelessness? Pile your cash into that. And Georgie says, climate change, my mind is blown. My past life as a medical research scientist wants to listen to Piers, but my spidey senses tell me he's wrong. That was Georgia, who was on just a minute ago. Nick Kader says, I'm no expert, but 25 years ago, I was told in school Britain would be a subtropical country by now because of global warming. Now, that hasn't happened, and global warming has become climate change. We need facts, not opinions. And Madge says, climate change experts and Piers Corbyn both agree that the world weather system is creating havoc. They should combine data, work together, get solutions. And Tyrannosaurus, how wonderful. From ice age to heat waves, climate changes since the Earth was created. Humans destroy the trees that absorb CO2 and produce oxygen and pollute the earth and oceans with plastic and chemicals. And Councillor James Ball says, what's Hilary Benn got against the WTO rules? Well, I don't know when he changed, but I've got a Tony Benn diary in which he expresses how proud he is that Hillary had brought the Labour conference to its feet with a pounding attack on the EU. And John Locke says greenhouse gases like CO2 are a small part of the atmosphere. True. However, they are very powerful. If they were not in the atmosphere, the average temperature of the Earth would be minus 15 degrees rather than the plus 15 degrees it is now. We mess at our peril. And Peter Wadhams, oh no, this is an anonymous text which says, scientists lie, science does not. Corbyn is a meteorologist. It is not his field. Ask an atmospheric and oceanic physicist like Peter Wadhams. Now, after a long delay in which he has educated himself superbly, here's Andrew in Helen's Bay in the north of Ireland. Andrew, welcome back.
Hi, George. It's fantastic to be back again. Funnily enough, on St Andrew's Day of all days as well.
Yes, yes, a great day.
I know. Just discuss Brexit with you. As I mentioned in a tweet which I sent you a few days ago, the best Brexit deal, of course, is that the north of Ireland reunites with the south, because the north of Ireland has been a bargaining chip for the EU through this entire negotiation, which they've played, you know, as they would do.
It's coming yet, I think, Andrew.
Yep. Well, I think it might be in the next 5 years. But
yes, so do I.
Possibly.
Yeah. There's a very interesting piece in the Financial Times today, which talks about how reunification is suddenly back in play.
Oh yeah. Well, the polls have suggested that as well. I think it was obviously they mentioned the support for United Ireland a few years ago was always understated, but I think now that there's real evidence that it's more than likely. I think at least 40 or 50%. It probably is. It's probably higher than that. I'm not Leo Varadkar's biggest fan by any stretch of the imagination, but I'll take him over Arlene Foster any day of the week.
Well, if Ireland reunited, of course, Leo wouldn't be in power for long.
Oh, of course not at all. I'm hardly his biggest fan. On the deal itself, Theresa May has absolutely got no chance of getting the deal through. Not one iota. My own MP, rather embarrassingly, is going to vote for it. Funnily enough, she's the only independent MP or MP in Northern Ireland to vote.
Is that Lady Herman?
Yeah, that's Lady Herman. Yeah, she voted.
She's a very nice woman, by the way. I know her quite well.
Oh yes, she is a very nice woman, but I just disagree with her on that. And she's basically the last MP in Northern Ireland's other than Sinn Féin who don't hold their seats, and obviously the DUP. Theresa May will probably lose the vote. I will see by a 50 to 100 vote margin.
I think it'll be 100 plus.
Yeah, definitely, I could see that. But look on the bright side, George. She'll be able to go running around in the wheat fields whenever she resigns.
Very well put, Andrew. Welcome back. Here is Guy in Stoke-On-Trent. Guy, welcome.
Yeah, hi George. Thanks for taking my call.
Welcome.
It's the meaningful vote, and I've got a suspicion that if it goes against Theresa May, she's going to, in fact, before it even go to vote, she's going to hold them to ransom, the Tories, and the message will be, if I lose this vote, I'm going to call an election. And so
but she can't do that, Guy, because under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, a definitive vote in the House with 66% of the members voting for would have to be held before Parliament could be dissolved. It's not like the old days.
Right. So in that case, what I'd got in my mind that she could be holding them to ransom isn't going to work because of the
No, I mean, she'd have to, of course, Labour would vote more or less, one would imagine, en masse for a general election. But I don't see many of the Tories doing that, do you?
No, well, I didn't know that, George. You know, at least I'm educated.
She might hold them to ransom by saying she'll resign, because that would be devastating for them, I'm sure. No, I mean, she's a goner. She loses the vote on the 11th, and especially if she loses it big, I think she will resign. And if she doesn't resign, 48 letters will appear pretty promptly because, well, the Tories are running out of time to decide what they're going to do before the end of March.
Yeah, can they produce the letters following the meaningful vote?
Yes, and I'm sure that they will if necessary, but I don't think myself it will be necessary. I think she'll resign.
Yeah, well, I'll
give somebody else a chance to bring the DUP back on side, bring the Brexiteers back on side, and go back to Brussels and say, this is your last chance. It's no deal or a better deal. What have you got up your sleeve?
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you again, Guy. I'm closing in on 300,000 followers on Twitter. So if you are on Twitter and you're not already following me, please do. And if you are living in Norway and enjoying this global warming discussion, but come along. I'm speaking tomorrow in Oslo, in Norway. I'm at the famous pub in North London, the Dublin Castle, on Wednesday for the Rock and Roll Book Club. And I'm speaking in Nottingham at the Savoy next Saturday. And don't forget my David Kelly film, please. I need your support. Only 25 days or so to go to raise the requisite. That's on Kickstarter. #Killing Kelly. Mankimo says animal farming causes a high percentage of climate change damage. Many may joke about vegans, but the more of us there are, the less damage to the environment and less cruelty through many heinous farming practices. Actually, I had a vegan breakfast this very morning. Let's hear from James in Rill, Denbighshire, beg your pardon. Go ahead, James.
It's a mistake to make, George.
Sorry, mate.
Happy St Andrew's Day to you.
Thank you.
I was going to say, I would recommend people click onto you on Twitter and start following you, because that's where I've got a lot of my political education from in the past.
Well, thank you. I'm quite active on it, and it is the fastest way to communicate, no doubt.
And that's really what I was going to talk about, really, was 3 years ago, I wasn't politically engaged at all. In fact, I'd just come off a law degree up here in Wales in a desperate hope of getting a job, to be honest, and I ended up on it. And, of course, you're indoctrinated for a year on basically how wonderful the European Union is.
Ah, yes. They spend a lot of money on that.
A lot of money, yeah. They send over their best professors and doctors. Anyway, so I was completely indoctrinated, and I happened, by good chance, to bump into my local sort of Scotsman from Glasgow, 84-year-old Duncan McGregor, who's basically been a member of the Communist Party when Jimmy Reid was doing his work in Clyde and everything, and listening to your shows, which I was Sputnik, I'm following you on Twitter and everything. So I'm in the odd position, along with Duncan, of being one of the few people in the local Labour Party, the Corbyn Wing Labour Party, who voted for Brexit, who was elected here. Because there seems to be no education at all, political education, amongst the majority of my friends and comrades about the past, position, the Benite position.
Yeah, you're right. It's as if it never happened.
Yeah.
And people who would call themselves followers of Mr. Benn, what would they have done if Mr. Benn was still alive and leading the Brexit campaign? What would they have done?
I don't know. I mean, I have this argument all the time about, because obviously most of them want a people's vote. I hate that term. But I keep saying to them, as you've touched on today on the show, is if you have a people's vote, and we remain in the EU, we can't implement the manifesto.
Quite. And what about all the millions of people that will say, hey, we're people too, and we've already voted on this?
This never seems to be any depth on the BBC or Sky News or with all these,
There's no more offensive phrase than the phrase, let's have a people's vote, as if the 17.4 million who prevailed in the referendum are not people. James, great to talk to you. Give Duncan my regards, please. Andrew is in southeast London. Let's hear from him.
All hail to St Andrew.
Happy St Andrew's Day to you, Andrew.
George, it's good to talk to you again.
And you.
There's so much data that has to be processed in order to produce an accurate projection of climate that it is. The trouble with scientists is they specialize, and so they look at one particular aspect. Carbon dioxide is not a problem because nature takes care of that. There's a huge area of blue-green algae in the South Atlantic, which is growing. And although we're cutting down rainforests, I think the Chinese planted 1 million trees last year or the year before. It all helps to keep a balance. But the real problem with all this tumultuous weather is the warming of the ocean, which indeed will produce about a metre rise in sea levels around the world. But I heard one idea somebody came up with, and why don't we sort of create a raft of these balloons that the kids have for parties and this sort of thing, that mirror.
Yeah.
A giant mirror, sort of moored in the equator on the sea, but still allow marine life to function. But it would reflect a lot of the sun back to where it came from. That would keep the oceans a bit cooler. And if we can keep the oceans a bit cooler, then we won't have these. I think Sydney had a month's rain in 90 minutes or something last 2 days ago.
Well, but there's been a tremendous drought in New South Wales, the worst on record.
Well, yes, and these hurricanes that devastate everything, and the forest fires and this sort of thing. We're going through.
There's a tsunami in Anchorage in Alaska right now.
Yeah, these things are created, but much of them are created by the change of sea temperatures.
Interesting, Andrew. Let's go to John in Thirsk, North Yorkshire. Go ahead, John.
Hi, George. I am a supporter of Extinction Rebellion, and it's a shame I couldn't have got on with Piers.
But you're on now, so tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single thing he said, I think, was wrong. He's not taking into account every single indicator on the planet that is pushing us towards extinction. You know, destruction of the soil, destruction of habitat, destruction of species. Everything is indicating that we're going in absolutely the wrong way, irrespective of the overall climate temperature rise. And his point about the jet stream, I just thought was absolutely nonsense. The jet stream is wobbly because the Arctic is melting. The Arctic is actually heating. That's what's pushing the jet stream down. That's why we're getting cold, wobbly bits and blasts, because the Arctic is essentially melting. You know, and unless we grapple with this now, very, very quickly, this is why I support absolutely Extinction Rebellion. We are going to be in an absolute terrible situation.
Well, you've argued it very succinctly and very powerfully, John. Thanks for doing that. Mal says a united Ireland, maybe the Irish nationalists, along with the EU, should go away and come up with an all-Ireland plan, /deal, to offer to the Unionists in Northern Ireland. And Michael Folker says, I voted Remain because I wanted to ensure my descendants never had to fight a European war like my forefathers did. My dad voted Leave because he'd had enough of being run by faceless, unelected bureaucrats. For both of us, immigration was irrelevant. And Bob Justice says, here's a finding from tonight's show. The caller who wondered where the CO2 was in his warm house. It's coming out of the back of his boiler into the atmosphere. The warmth in summer does come from the sun. CO2 doesn't. An irreverent pastor told me. And the Reverend Tony X says, I hope she doesn't take this the wrong way, but hearing Norma is akin to being tucked in as a child. Such a soft, knowledgeable woman. How beautiful. How beautifully put. That's exactly right. And Barham says, with global warming, I will follow the same logic as that propounded in Pascal's wager. I believe it to be true because if it is, then we have a chance to save ourselves. If not, then it really matters not. That's quite well put, actually. One or two more, and then I'm going to take one more caller. The Very Reverend Will of the People writes, George, my newly established church is considering a reintroduction of the sale of indulgences. Be sin-free, even if you appear on the BBC under dodgy circumstances. How big do you reckon my potential market could be? That is very, very well put. Paul says, George, we're of a certain age, and I've lived through 3 recessions and many crises. The major lesson I've learned in my life is that good or bad, all things pass. So it will with Brexit. That's Paul in Hove. Neil Salter says, Piers has genuine motives, but is wrong in nearly all of what he's saying. He's right about Drax wood burning and carbon releases, sometimes following warming. These are feedback explanations. Let's take Mohamed in Maidenhead.
Good father, how are you?
I'm very, very good to hear your voice again, Mohamed.
I know, it's been a while, George. I missed you so much, man. It's been really good
to hear you.
Good to hear you. I really missed you. And, obviously, tuning in always. I know you've got the event soon in Nottingham with Ken. Hoping to make that. I haven't got the tickets yet. Are there any still left, by the way?
There are, There's about 150 sold, so there's about 70 left.
Wicked. I'll hopefully pinch one of those and be able to come, George. So, really looking forward to that. But I just called tonight because obviously I missed you. And, obviously for all the listeners as well, I thought I'd put a rap. It's a rap, George, which you've heard before. It's one of the ones I've actually sent you. It's part of one of the ones I've sent you.
Okay. Well, I always enjoy your rap. Go ahead.
Okay, here goes. The Tyson Fury of rap is on. Are you ready?
Yes.
Here goes.
I'm ready.
Mr. Galloway, you're an inspiration, done all kinds of charity across the nation. He was listened on the radio for a good duration. He always began his talking with this quotation. Mother of all talk shows on the radio station, he walks the talk with double G education. I see him as a godfather, and I'm not alone. He's known to most of the people as Corleone. Double G in his name, but he's the one and only. If I was double G, I would say you can't clone me. 007 even said he can't phone me. Forget Mr. Bond because everybody knows me. There's other MPs, but I'm telling you they're phony. My name is Mr. G. I advise you to vote me. Have a stubble like me. Get in trouble like me. Smoking enemies hubble bubble like me. But many me's don't have the muscle like me. Double G in my name, but there's no couple like me. Bam!
That is brilliant. Totally, absolutely brilliant. So brilliant, they're clapping through the glass amongst my production staff. Thank you very much, Mohamed. I really am touched by that. But you don't need to vote for me. I'm no longer in the votes business. And here's a text that says, Labour, not one manual worker in their midst, unlike in the 70s. That's a very good point, and a point that I have made many times myself. There's a real problem if Labour has no labour in its ranks. There's a real problem if Labour is the university man and woman's paradise. There's a problem if Labour doesn't represent those who live by their labour, doesn't represent the workers who labour, doesn't represent those whose collars are blue, who work for weekly wages, or who are unemployed looking for work for wages, or who are underemployed and who are on insecure and temporary 0 hours contracts. There's a problem if Labour is no longer the party of Labour. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week.